The cold had stopped hurting an hour ago. That was when Elara Thorne knew she was dying, when the snow no longer bit at her skin, when her fingers ceased their trembling, when the world faded into a strange, peaceful white. She lay in the ditch where they had thrown her. Her wedding dress, if one could call the torn, mud-stained rag a wedding dress, spread around her like a shroud. Her lips moved in a silent prayer, not for rescue, but for forgiveness. Forgiveness for believing love could exist in a heart as black as Thomas Ashford's, for trusting the man who had taken her inheritance, her dignity, and now her life. The last thing she expected was the sound of hoofbeats. The last thing she wanted was to be found like this, discarded, worthless, a cautionary tale. But the horses stopped. Boots crunched through snow, and a voice, deep, commanding, edged with fury, shattered her resignation. Who did this to you? Wait, before the next confession unfolds. If this story has already stirred your heart, tell us where you're watching from. To make sure you don't miss the next betrayal, kiss, or redemption, subscribe and join our circle. The next heartbeat might change everything. Now, back to the scene. She couldn't answer. Her throat was frozen, her tongue thick and useless. Strong arms lifted her from the snow, so carefully, as though she were made of glass. And she was pressed against warmth, against wool and leather, and the steady thunder of a heartbeat. The man carrying her barked orders to unseen others, his voice cutting through the winter air like a blade. Elara tried to see his face, but her vision swam, darkness creeping at the edges. "Stay with me," the voice commanded. Not a request, an order from someone accustomed to obedience. "You will not die in my arms. Do you hear me? You will not." She wanted to tell him it was too late. That death had already brushed its lips against hers and found her wanting. But consciousness slipped away like snow through her fingers, and she fell into darkness with the phantom warmth of his arms still wrapped around her. Elara woke to firelight and pain. Not the numbing, merciful pain of freezing, but the vicious, burning agony of a body remembering it was meant to be alive. She gasped, her back arching off impossibly soft sheets, and immediately a hand pressed against her shoulder, gentle but firm. "Don't move, your body is still recovering." The voice from the snow. She turned her head, slowly, and saw him for the first time. He sat in a chair beside the bed, closer than propriety would ever allow, his posture relaxed, but his eyes, God, his eyes were anything but. They were the color of a winter storm, gray and relentless, and they studied her with an intensity that made her want to hide beneath the covers. His face was all harsh angles, a strong jaw shadowed with stubble, a blade of a nose, lips pressed into a line that suggested he smiled rarely, if ever. Dark hair fell across his forehead, slightly disheveled, as though he had been running his hands through it. He was beautiful in the way a sword was beautiful, elegant, dangerous, and entirely unforgiving. "Who are you?" Elara's voice came out as a rasp, barely recognizable. "Adrian Blackwood," he said, "Duke of Northmoor." He leaned forward slightly, his elbows resting on his knees. "And you are Elara Thorne, formerly Elara Ashford, for approximately 6 hours before your husband attempted to murder you." The words struck her like a physical blow. She closed her eyes, willing herself not to remember. The church, the vows, Thomas's smile that never reached his eyes. The ride afterward, his hand tight on her wrist. The carriage stopping on that desolate road. His voice, cold and flat. "Did you truly think I wanted you? You were only ever the means to your father's estate." And now that the papers are signed, the push, the fall, the snow rising up to meet her. "How long?" she whispered. 3 days. The physician said it was a miracle you survived the night, let alone 3. The Duke's voice held no warmth, only a clinical assessment of facts. "You had severe frostbite on your extremities. We may yet lose 2 of your toes. Your lungs were compromised from the cold. You had a concussion from the fall." He paused. "And bruises. Many bruises." Shame flooded through her, hot and choking. She turned her face away, unable to bear his scrutiny. "Then you know what I am. I know what was done to you. That is not the same thing." "I am ruined," Ilara said flatly. "Married and discarded in the same day. No family, no fortune. Thomas made sure of that. You should have left me in the snow, Your Grace. It would have been a mercy." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the crackle of the fire. When the Duke finally spoke, his words were measured, deliberate, and utterly shocking. "I have a proposition for you, Mrs. Ashford." She flinched at the name. "Don't call me that." "Very well, Miss Thorne." He stood, moving to the window, his hands clasped behind his back. Against the gray winter light, he looked like something carved from stone, immovable, eternal. "Your husband, as you may have surmised, is a criminal. Not merely for what he did to you, though that alone would be sufficient to see him hanged. He has been defrauding noble families for 3 years, marrying vulnerable women, stealing their inheritances, and disposing of them. You are the first to survive." Ilara's breath caught. "The first? There were 2 others before you. One whose body was found in the Thames, another who simply disappeared." The Duke's jaw clenched. He is careful. He chooses women with no powerful connections, no one who will ask too many questions. He has been untouchable. Until now? Adrian turned to face her, and something flickered in those storm-gray eyes. Something that might have been anger, or might have been something far more dangerous. "Until now. Because you, Miss Thorne, are going to help me destroy him." "I'm going to do what?" "You heard me." He moved closer to the bed, each step measured. "Thomas Ashford believes you are dead. He has already begun courting his next victim, Lady Catherine Bellamy, an heiress with no living parents and a fortune in railroad investments. In 2 months, he will propose. In 3, they will marry. And in 4, she will vanish, just as the others did." "So go to the magistrate," Ilara said, her voice rising despite the pain in her chest. "Tell them what you know. Have him arrested." "With what evidence? The word of a duke is not sufficient without proof, and Ashford has been meticulous. Every marriage legitimate, every inheritance legally transferred, every disappearance explainable." Adrian's hands curled into fists at his sides. "I need evidence that will hold in a court of law. I need his confession. I need him trapped, exposed, unable to wriggle free with bought judges and clever solicitors." "And what does this have to do with me?" "Everything." The Duke's gaze bored into hers. "You will live here, in my home, under my protection. You will recover your strength, and when the time is right, you will return from the dead and confront the man who tried to kill you. In public, where he cannot deny you, where his mask of respectability will shatter before the entire ton. Your testimony, combined with the investigation I have been conducting, will be enough to hang him." Ilara stared at him, her mind reeling. "You're mad." "I am determined. There is a difference." He sat back down in the chair, his posture relaxing slightly, though his eyes remained intense. "I will not lie to you, Miss Thorne. This will not be easy." Your reputation is already in tatters. Living in a bachelor duke's household will only make matters worse. Society will call you a whore, a schemer, a woman of loose morals. They will whisper that you seduced me, that you invented your suffering for sympathy and coin. They will be vicious. They already are, Ilara said bitterly. Yes, but this time you will have something they do not expect. Me. My name, my protection, my considerable resources. He leaned forward again, his voice dropping. Help me stop Thomas Ashford, and I will ensure you want for nothing. A home, an income, a new identity if you wish it. Whatever you need to build a life after this is over. It was too much, too sudden. She had woken from death to find herself in the care of a duke who looked at her like she was a weapon to be wielded, not a woman to be pitied. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, that accepting his offer would drag her into something far darker than a simple rescue. But then she thought of Thomas's smile, his hands on her throat in that carriage, the casual cruelty with which he had thrown her into the snow, as though she were nothing more than refuse. And she thought of the other women, the ones who hadn't survived. What would you have me do? Ilara asked quietly. The Duke's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes sparked to life, approval, perhaps, or satisfaction. For now, heal, recover your strength, learn to walk again without pain, to speak without your voice cracking. He stood, moving toward the door. And when you are ready, we will begin planning your resurrection. Your Grace, Ilara called out as he reached for the handle. He paused, glancing back. Why do you care? About me? About the other women? Why does this matter to you? For a long moment, Adrian Blackwood said nothing. Then, so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Because someone should have cared about my sister. The door closed behind him, leaving Ilara alone with the fire and the weight of his words. The days that followed were a strange sort of purgatory. Ilara's body healed slowly, painfully. The physician, a stern, elderly man named Dr. Garrett, visited twice daily, checking her lungs, examining her frostbitten toes with grim efficiency. She lost 2 toes on her left foot, just as the Duke had warned. The phantom pain of their absence kept her awake at night, a constant reminder of how close she had come to losing everything. But worse than the physical pain was the isolation. She saw no one except Dr. Garrett, the housekeeper, Mrs. Dawson, a woman of few words and many disapproving looks, and occasionally the Duke himself. Adrian came to her room each evening after dinner, sitting in that same chair by her bed, and they talked. Or rather, he asked questions and she answered, her story spilling out in fragments and half-formed confessions. She told him about her father's death, the debts he had left behind, the creditors circling like vultures. She told him about Thomas Ashford's arrival, charming, attentive, offering marriage as though it were a rescue and not a trap. She told him about the wedding, the signatures, the papers she had barely read because she trusted him. God help her, she had trusted him. And Adrian listened. He never interrupted, never offered empty platitudes or false comfort. He simply absorbed every word with that sharp, calculating gaze, as though he were building a case in his mind, brick by brutal brick. He knew exactly what he was doing, Ilara said one night, 3 weeks after her rescue. She was sitting up now, propped against pillows, a shawl around her shoulders against the evening chill. Every step was planned. The courtship, the speed of the engagement. He knew I was desperate, that I had no one to advise me. He is a predator, Adrian said simply. Predators are skilled at identifying weakness. Is that what you think I am?
Weak. I think you were vulnerable. That is not the same thing. He tilted his head, studying her. You survived 3 days in freezing temperatures with a head wound and then woke up ready to fight. That is not weakness, Miss Thorne. That is remarkable. The compliment, delivered in his usual flat tone, somehow meant more than flowery praise would have. Ilara felt heat rise to her cheeks and looked away. "Tell me about your sister," she said impulsively. The air in the room changed. Adrian's expression shuddered, his jaw tightening. For a moment, she thought he would refuse, that he would stand and leave as he always did when the conversation veered too close to the personal. But he didn't. "Her name was Isabel," he said quietly. "She was 17, beautiful, naive, desperate to experience the world beyond our estate." His hands curled around the arms of the chair. "A man came to London that season, a gentleman, or so we all believed. He courted her with poetry and promises. My father approved the match. I was away, serving in the army, and by the time I returned, she was married and gone." Ilara's chest tightened. "What happened?" "She died 6 months later. Officially, it was a riding accident. Her husband was very sad, very convincing in his grief. Adrian's voice was devoid of emotion, but his knuckles were white. He inherited everything she had brought to the marriage: her dowry, her jewelry, a small estate in Kent. And then he remarried within the year." "You think he killed her?" "I know he killed her." The Duke looked at her then, and Ilara saw something terrible in his eyes. A grief so deep and so cold it had frozen into something harder than ice. "I found her diary, years later, hidden in her things that he had sent back to us. She wrote about his rages, his cruelty, how he locked her in rooms for days, how he struck her when she displeased him. The last entry was dated 2 days before her death."
He says I am an inconvenience. I fear what that means. "Adrian," Ilara whispered, using his Christian name without thinking. He didn't correct her. "I tried to bring him to justice. I went to the magistrate, the courts, anyone who would listen. But he was careful. There were no witnesses, no proof beyond the ravings of a grieving brother who couldn't accept his sister's accidental death. His laugh was bitter. He died 3 years ago, peacefully, in his sleep, surrounded by his new family and his new fortune. I'm sorry. So am I." Adrian stood, moving to the window as he always did when the conversation grew too heavy. "That is why I began investigating men like Thomas Ashford. That is why I will not stop until he hangs. Because Isabel deserved justice, and so do you. So does every woman he has destroyed." The silence that followed was not uncomfortable. It was the silence of shared grief, of 2 broken people recognizing the fractures in each other. "I will help you," Ilara said firmly. "Whatever it takes, whatever you need me to do. I will help you destroy him." Adrian turned, and for the first time since she had met him, something that might have been a smile ghosted across his lips. "Good. Then tomorrow we begin." Her training, as the Duke called it, started at dawn. Ilara had assumed he meant teaching her the details of his plan, the legalities of what they would need to prove. She had not expected to be woken before sunrise by Mrs. Dawson and told to dress in a riding habit. "Riding?" Ilara stared at the housekeeper. "I can barely walk without limping." "His Grace insists." Mrs. Dawson's tone suggested that His Grace's insistence was law, and there would be no arguing. 20 minutes later, Ilara found herself in the stables, leaning heavily on a cane, glaring at Adrian Blackwood as he saddled a gentle mare. "You cannot be serious." "Entirely serious." He adjusted the stirrups without looking at her. "When you return to society, you will need to appear strong, confident, unbroken. A woman who limps and flinches will invite pity, not respect. You need to relearn your body, reclaim your strength." I lost 2 toes, Elara snapped. I am not going to be dancing at balls anytime soon. No, but you will be riding, walking, and standing tall when you face Thomas Ashford. Adrian finally turned to her, his expression serious. I am not doing this to torture you, Miss Thorne. I am doing this because the woman who will destroy him cannot appear defeated. She must appear victorious, and that requires work. He was right. She hated that he was right. Over the following weeks, Elara's life became a carefully orchestrated routine. Mornings were spent in the saddle, learning to balance despite the pain in her foot, learning to control a horse with her voice and her will rather than her legs. Afternoons were spent with Mrs. Dawson, who taught her the intricacies of running a household, how to command servants, how to host a dinner, how to navigate the brutal politics of the upper class. And evenings were spent with Adrian. They ate dinner together now, in the small dining room rather than her bedroom. They discussed strategy, law, the evidence he had been gathering. He showed her letters, financial records, witness statements from servants who had worked in Thomas Ashford's household and seen things that troubled them. But they also talked about other things, books they had read, music they loved, the places they dreamed of visiting. It was in those moments, when the conversation drifted from justice and revenge to simpler pleasures, that Elara began to see the man beneath the Duke's cold exterior. Adrian Blackwood was not warm. He would never be warm. But he was kind in ways that mattered. In the way he always ensured her tea was the right temperature, in the way he noticed when she was in pain and called for Dr. Garrett without her needing to ask. In the way he listened, truly listened, as though her words were the most important thing in the world. And slowly, treacherously, Elara felt something shift in her chest. It was late April when she realized she was falling in love with him. They were in the library, the fire burning low, and Adrian was reading aloud from a book of poetry, something he had started doing when he noticed she struggled to sleep. His voice was deep and steady, and Elara found herself watching him rather than listening to the words. The way the firelight caught in his dark hair, the way his lips moved over the verses, the way his eyes would occasionally flicker to her, checking that she was still awake. He looked up and caught her staring. "What?" he asked, one eyebrow raised. "Nothing," Elara said quickly, her cheeks flaming. I was just thinking." "About?" About you, about the way you saved me, about the way you look at me as though I matter, as though I am not broken and ruined and worthless." "About Thomas," she lied, "about what I will say to him when the time comes." Adrian's expression darkened. He closed the book, setting it aside. "You will say whatever you need to say to survive the encounter. Nothing more, nothing less. I will be with you the entire time. He will not touch you again." "You can't promise that." "I can, and I do." He leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes intense. "I will not let him hurt you, Elara. Not again, not ever." Her name. He had never used her Christian name before. The intimacy of it stole her breath. "Adrian," she whispered, and the distance between them seemed to evaporate. He was so close now, close enough that she could see the flecks of blue in his gray eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, calloused and gentle, and Elara's heart thundered in her chest. "I should not," he began, but she interrupted him. "Please." She didn't know what she was asking for. Comfort, perhaps? Connection? Proof that she was still alive, still capable of feeling something other than fear and rage. Adrian's control, that iron discipline she had come to recognize, cracked. He cupped her face in both hands and kissed her.
It was not a gentle kiss. It was desperate, fierce, a collision of two people who had been alone for too long. Elara gasped against his mouth, her hands fisting in his shirt, and he pulled her closer, one arm wrapping around her waist as though he could anchor her to the earth through sheer will. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Adrian rested his forehead against hers. "This is a terrible idea," he said, his voice rough. "I know. It complicates everything. I know. I don't care." He pulled back enough to meet her eyes, and what she saw there made her chest ache. Longing, need, something that looked dangerously like love. "I should, but I don't. Tell me to stop, Elara. Tell me this is a mistake, and I will walk away." She should. She knew she should. Nothing good could come from falling in love with the Duke of Northmoor, a man as damaged and haunted as she was, a man who had saved her, only to use her in his quest for vengeance. But when she looked at him, she didn't see a weapon or a tool. She saw a man who had sat by her bedside for weeks, who had taught her to ride again, to stand again, to believe she was worth saving, who had shared his grief and his fury and his impossible hope that they could make the world a little less cruel. "It's not a mistake," Elara said softly. "Or if it is, it's one I'm willing to make." Adrian kissed her again, slower this time, reverent, and Elara let herself fall into the warmth of it, into the impossible promise of something beautiful blooming in the ashes of her ruined life. The next morning, everything shattered. Elara woke to raised voices, Adrian's, harsh and furious, and another man's, equally angry. She dressed quickly, ignoring the lingering ache in her foot, and made her way downstairs. The door to Adrian's study was ajar. She approached quietly, years of surviving a cruel household teaching her how to move without making a sound. "Cannot be serious, Adrian. The woman is living in your home, unchaperoned, for months on end. Do you have any idea what people are saying?" "I don't particularly care what people are saying." Richard, Adrian's cousin, Elara remembered, the one who served as his estate manager and occasional voice of reason. "Well, you should care," Richard snapped, "because the rumors have reached London, and they are vicious. They're saying you've taken a mistress, that she's using you for your money, that you've gone mad with grief over Isabel, and this woman is taking advantage." "That is enough." The ice in Adrian's voice could have frozen fire. Elara pressed closer to the door, her heart pounding. "I am trying to protect you," Richard said, his tone softening slightly. "And her, if you truly care about her. The only way to salvage this situation is to send her away. Give her money, set her up somewhere quiet, but get her out of this house before your reputation is completely destroyed." "She stays." "For God's sake, why? She's just a woman, Adrian. A woman with a tragic story, yes, but hardly worth throwing away everything you've built. Your standing in Parliament, your connections, your—" "She is not just a woman." Adrian's voice was low, deadly. "She is the woman I intend to marry." Elara's breath stopped. Silence filled the study. Then Richard laughed, a bitter, disbelieving sound. "Mary? You've known her for barely 2 months, and most of that time she's been recovering from attempted murder. You can't be serious." "I am entirely serious." "Then you're a fool." Richard's footsteps approached the door, and Elara scrambled back, pressing herself against the wall. "You think marrying her will silence the rumors? It will only confirm them. Society will believe you've been seduced, manipulated into proposing. They will never accept her as your duchess." "Then society can rot." Richard emerged from the study, his face flushed with anger. He barely glanced at Alara as he stormed past her, heading for the front door. Moments later, she heard the sound of hoofbeats fading into the distance. Ilara stood frozen in the hallway, her mind reeling. Married! Adrian wanted to marry her! She should have been elated. Instead, all she felt was a creeping dread. Slowly, she walked to the study door. Adrian stood at his desk, his hands braced against the wood, his head bowed. He looked exhausted, the lines of his face deeper than she had ever seen them. "How much did you hear?" he asked, without looking up. "Enough." He straightened, turning to face her, and his expression was carefully blank, the mask he wore when he didn't want her to see what he was thinking. "Then you know what I intend to propose." "Adrian, you don't have to." "Yes, I do." He moved toward her, his stride purposeful. "Richard is right about one thing. Your presence here has destroyed your reputation. If I send you away now, you will be branded a whore and a schemer for the rest of your life. No respectable household will employ you. No decent man will ever marry you." "I don't care about any of that," Ilara said, though her voice shook. "I care about the fact that you would change yourself to me out of obligation." "It is not obligation." "Then what is it?" "It is—" Adrian broke off, his jaw clenching. For a long moment, he said nothing, and Ilara saw the war raging behind his eyes, the instinct to hide, to protect himself from vulnerability, battling against something stronger. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough, almost helpless. "It is the fact that I wake each morning and the first thought in my mind is whether you slept well. It is the fact that I find excuses to be near you, to hear your voice, to see you smile. It is the fact that when I imagine my future, you are in it, not as a witness, not as a tool, but as my wife, my partner, the woman I would move heaven and earth to protect." He took a shaky breath. "I love you, Ilara. I did not mean to. I did not want to. But I do, and I cannot undo it any more than I can undo the color of my eyes." Ilara's vision blurred with tears. "You barely know me." "I know enough. I know you are brave, even when you are terrified. I know you are kind, even after the world has been cruel to you. I know you read books twice if you love them, that you cannot stand the taste of mushrooms, that you hum when you think no one is listening." He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers. "I know that I was half alive before I found you, and now I am not. Marry me, Ilara, not because society demands it, not because it is convenient, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it." She wanted to say yes. Every fiber of her being wanted to say yes. But a small, poisonous voice whispered in the back of her mind. "He saved you. He gave you a home, purpose, a reason to live. You owe him everything. Are you sure this love is real, or is it just gratitude, just dependence? And worse, Thomas said he loved you too. Look how that ended." "I need time," Ilara whispered. "Please, Adrian, I need time to think." Something flickered in his eyes. Hurt, maybe, or disappointment. But he nodded. "Of course. Take all the time you need." He released her hand and stepped back, the distance between them suddenly feeling like a chasm. "I will be in London for the next 3 days," he said, his voice once again flat and formal. "There is a session of Parliament I cannot miss. While I am gone, consider what you want, truly want. Not what you think you owe me, not what is practical or safe. What you want. Adrian." But he was already walking past her, his footsteps echoing down the hall. She heard the front door open and close, heard the horses being called for, and then he was gone, leaving her alone in the study with nothing but her tangled thoughts and the ghost of his confession hanging in the air. The 3 days Adrian was gone felt like 3 years. Ilara tried to distract herself. She read. She walked the estate grounds, marveling at the spring flowers beginning to bloom. She even attempted to help Mrs. Dawson with the household accounts, though the housekeeper made it clear this was highly irregular. But no matter what she did, she could not escape the question. What did she want? She loved Adrian. That much she knew with bone-deep certainty. She loved his quiet strength, his unwavering principles, the way he looked at her as though she were something precious. She loved the life they had begun to build here, the easy companionship that had grown between them. But was love enough? Could she truly be his Duchess, stand beside him in society, endure the whispers and the judgment? More importantly, could she trust her own feelings? She had been so wrong about Thomas. What if she was wrong about this, too? On the 3rd night, unable to sleep, Ilara made her way to the library. It was well past midnight, the house silent, and she sought the comfort of books, of losing herself in someone else's story. She found Mrs. Dawson there instead, sitting in Adrian's chair by the fire, a small portrait in her hands. "Oh," Ilara said, startled, "I'm sorry, I didn't mean to intrude." "You're not intruding, miss." Mrs. Dawson looked up, and there was an unusual softness in her eyes.
Couldn't sleep? No. Ilara moved closer, gesturing to the portrait. May I? The housekeeper hesitated, then handed it over. It was a painting of a young woman, 17 or 18, with dark hair and gray eyes and a smile that lit up the canvas. She wore a blue dress and held a book, and there was something so alive about her that it hurt to look at. "Isabel," Ilara breathed. "Aye, Lady Isabel." Mrs. Dawson's voice was thick with old grief. "I was her lady's maid, you know. Came to this household to serve her when she was just a girl. I watched her grow up, watched her fall in love, watched her—" The older woman's voice broke. Ilara set the portrait down gently and sat beside Mrs. Dawson. "Adrian told me what happened." "Did he tell you what it did to him?" Mrs. Dawson wiped her eyes roughly. "He was never a warm man, His Grace. Even as a boy, he was serious, controlled. But after Isabel died, something in him froze. He stopped smiling, stopped playing music, stopped painting, all the things he used to do when he thought no one was watching. He threw himself into hunting down men like the one who killed her, as though he could avenge her by proxy. I thought he would live the rest of his life like that, cold and alone and punishing himself for not saving her." "And then?" Ilara asked softly. Mrs. Dawson looked at her, and for the first time there was no disapproval in her gaze. "And then he brought you home, and I watched him change. Slowly at first, a softening around the edges. The way he looked at you, the way he spoke to you, it was like watching ice melt. He was alive again, Miss Thorne. For the first time in 8 years, he was alive." Tears spilled down Ilara's cheeks. "I'm afraid, Mrs. Dawson. I'm afraid I'll hurt him. I'm afraid I'm not strong enough to be what he needs." "Strength isn't about never being afraid, child. It's about choosing to love even when you are." The housekeeper patted her hand. "His Grace doesn't need a perfect duchess. He needs you." The woman who survived the unsurvivable. The woman who made him remember what it feels like to hope. Adrian returned the following afternoon, windswept and weary from the ride. He found Ilara in the garden, sitting on a bench beneath a willow tree, and for a moment he simply stood there, drinking in the sight of her. She looked up, and their eyes met. "I have an answer," Ilara said, "to your proposal."
Adrian's expression didn't change, but she saw his hands curl into fists at his sides. "I am listening." She stood, walking toward him slowly. The spring breeze caught her hair, and she tucked it behind her ear, a nervous gesture he had come to recognize. "I am afraid," she said. "I am afraid of trusting again, of being wrong again, of waking up one day and realizing this was all a beautiful dream. I am afraid of failing you, of not being the Duchess you need, of disappointing you." Adrian opened his mouth to respond, but she held up a hand. "But," Elara continued, her voice stronger now, "I am more afraid of living without you. I am more afraid of walking away from the first real happiness I have ever known. Mrs. Dawson told me that strength is choosing to love even when you are afraid. So that is what I am choosing." She stopped in front of him, close enough to touch. "Yes, Adrian, I will marry you. Not because society demands it, not because I owe you, but because I love you, because I want to build a life with you, because you are the best man I have ever known, and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." For a heartbeat, Adrian stood frozen. Then he was moving, closing the distance between them, pulling her into his arms and kissing her with a fierce joy that took her breath away. When he finally pulled back, his eyes were suspiciously bright. "I will spend the rest of my life proving you made the right choice," he said roughly. "I know you will," Elara replied, smiling through her tears. "But first, we have a monster to destroy."
Adrian's expression hardened, his arms tightening around her. "Yes, we do." The plan came together over the next month with military precision. Adrian's investigation into Thomas Ashford had unearthed a damning pattern. 3 dead wives in 6 years. Each one wealthy, each one vulnerable, each one conveniently dying after their fortunes had been legally transferred to him. But evidence was not enough. They needed a confession, a public unmasking that would leave no room for doubt. And so they set a trap. Word was carefully leaked that the Duke of Northmore would be hosting a ball, his first in 8 years, a grand affair to celebrate his engagement to a mysterious lady who had been staying at his estate. Invitations were sent to the cream of London society, including one to Thomas Ashford, who had recently arrived in town to court Lady Catherine Bellamy. Elara knew Thomas would come. He was too curious, too arrogant, too certain of his own invincibility. And she was right. The night of the ball, Elara stood in her chamber, staring at her reflection. The gown Adrian had commissioned for her was a masterpiece. Deep blue silk that brought out the color of her eyes, with silver embroidery that caught the light like stars. Her hair was swept up, revealing the line of her neck, and jewels glittered at her throat and ears. She looked like a duchess. She felt like a girl playing dress-up. A knock at the door. Adrian entered, and the sight of him in evening dress made her breath catch. He was devastating in black and white, all sharp elegance and restrained power. "You are beautiful," he said simply. "I'm terrified." "Good. That means you understand the stakes." He crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "You do not have to do this, Elara. Say the word and we call it off. We find another way. There is no other way. You said so yourself. We need him to expose himself publicly where he cannot deny it." She squeezed his hands. "I can do this. I want to do this." Adrian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. "Stay close to me. If at any point you feel unsafe, you give me the signal we discussed, and I will remove you immediately. Understood?" "Understood." They walked downstairs together, and as they approached the ballroom, Elara could hear the hum of conversation, the strains of music, the clink of champagne glasses. Adrian paused at the threshold, offering her his arm. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," Elara said honestly, "but let's do it anyway." They entered the ballroom, and the effect was immediate.
Conversation faltered, heads turned. She felt the weight of hundreds of eyes, heard the sharp intake of breath, the whispered speculation. And then she saw him. Thomas Ashford stood near the refreshment table, a glass of champagne in his hand, his expression one of polite interest. He was handsome, she remembered distantly, fair-haired and charming, with the kind of smile that made you want to trust him. Until you saw the coldness in his eyes. Their gazes locked across the room, and she watched the color drain from his face, watched the champagne glass slip from his fingers to shatter on the floor, watched his mouth open in shock, then close, then open again, as though he could not quite believe what he was seeing. Ilara smiled, a sharp, dangerous smile, and stepped forward. The crowd parted for them as they crossed the ballroom. Adrian's hand was warm and steady on her arm, anchoring her, reminding her that she was not alone. They stopped directly in front of Thomas, close enough that she could see the sweat beading on his forehead, the frantic calculation in his eyes. "Good evening, Mr. Ashford," Ilara said pleasantly. "It has been some time, has it not?" Thomas stared at her, his mouth working soundlessly. Finally, he managed, "Ilara, I thought you were dead?" She tilted her head. "Yes, I imagine you did." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Several women pressed handkerchiefs to their mouths. Ilara felt the attention of the room sharpen, every ear straining to hear. "That's not—" Thomas's voice cracked. He cleared his throat, forcing a laugh. "Your Grace, I don't know what this woman has told you, but she is clearly delusional. We had a brief courtship that ended badly, nothing more. She was distraught when I ended our engagement." "You mean when you married her, stole her inheritance, and threw her into the snow to die?" Adrian's voice cut like a blade. "Strange, that is not how the marriage certificate reads, or the financial documents transferring her father's estate to you, or the physician's report detailing her injuries consistent with strangulation and exposure." Thomas's eyes darted around the room, looking for allies, for escape. "This is absurd. She is lying. She is trying to extort money from me, from you." "Am I lying about Margaret Hartwell, too?" Ilara asked softly. "Your first wife, who drowned in the Thames 3 years ago? Or Sarah Pemberton, who disappeared without a trace 2 years ago? Are they lying, Thomas? Or are they simply dead?" The color drained further from Thomas's face. Around them, the crowd had gone deathly silent. "I don't know what you're talking about," Thomas said, but his voice wavered. "I think you do." Adrian produced a sheaf of papers from his coat. Marriage certificates, death certificates, financial transfers, letters from servants who witnessed your cruelty, testimony from investigators who have been tracking your movements for the past 3 years. He handed the papers to the nearest gentleman, Lord Hartwell. Ilara realized with a jolt. "Margaret's father. Perhaps you would like to examine these, my lord." Lord Hartwell's hands shook as he took the papers. His face, already pale, turned ashen as he read. When he looked up, there were tears streaming down his cheeks. "You killed my daughter," he said hoarsely. "You killed my Margaret." "That's not— I never—" Thomas stumbled backward, his composure crumbling. "She was an accident. The others were—" He stopped. The room seemed to hold its breath. "The others?" Ilara prompted gently. "What others, Thomas?" Thomas's eyes were wild now, cornered. "You don't understand. I didn't want to, but they were so naive, so trusting. And the money. I had debts, obligations. I had no choice." "You had every choice," Adrian said coldly. "You chose to prey on vulnerable women. You chose to steal from them. You chose to murder them when they were no longer useful. Those were your choices, Ashford, no one else's. Thomas lunged forward suddenly, reaching for Ilara. You should be dead. You were supposed to die. But Adrian was faster. His fist connected with Thomas' jaw with a sickening crack, and Thomas went down hard, blood streaming from his mouth. Immediately, 2 footmen appeared, hauling Thomas to his feet. His eyes rolled, dazed, and when he looked at Ilara again, there was nothing but hatred. Whore, he spat, lying, scheming. That's enough. Adrian's voice was arctic. He turned to address the room. Lord Hartwell, I believe you will want to summon the magistrate. Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the disturbance. Please enjoy the rest of the evening. But no one moved. They simply stared at Thomas, at Ilara, at Adrian, as the footman dragged Thomas away, his curses echoing through the ballroom. Lord Hartwell approached Ilara, the papers still clutched in his hands. Up close, she could see he was an older man, dignified, with Margaret's eyes. "Thank you," he said, his voice breaking. "Thank you for giving me the truth, for giving her justice." Ilara's throat tightened. "I am so sorry for your loss, my lord. And I for yours. What he did to you." Lord Hartwell shook his head. "You are a brave woman, Lady Ilara."
Braver than most. She wasn't Lady Ilara yet, but she didn't correct him. Around them, the crowd began to stir, conversations resuming in hushed tones. Ilara knew the gossip would be vicious, the speculation endless. But she also knew they had won. Adrian's hand found hers, squeezing gently. "Come, let us leave them to their whispers." They walked out of the ballroom together, through the house and into the moonlit garden beyond. The night air was cool and sweet, and Ilara inhaled deeply, feeling as though she could breathe properly for the first time in months. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's actually over." "The trial will take time," Adrian cautioned. "There will be testimony, legal proceedings. It will not be pleasant." "I don't care." Ilara turned to him, taking both his hands in hers. "We did it, Adrian. We stopped him. No more women will die because of Thomas Ashford." "No," Adrian agreed, and there was something in his eyes, a lightness she had never seen before, as though a burden he had carried for 8 years had finally been lifted. "They won't." They stood in the garden, hands clasped, and for a long moment simply looked at each other. Then Adrian drew her close, resting his forehead against hers. "I love you," he said quietly, "in case I have not said it enough." "You could never say it enough," Ilara replied, smiling. "I love you too." He kissed her then, soft and slow, a promise of all the tomorrows they would share. And Ilara let herself fall into it, into him, into the impossible miracle of having survived the worst and found something beautiful on the other side. Thomas Ashford's trial was the scandal of the season. Every newspaper in London covered it. Every drawing room dissected it. The courtroom was packed daily with spectators eager to witness the downfall of the charming gentleman who had hidden a monster beneath his smile. Ilara testified. It was one of the hardest things she had ever done, standing in that witness box, recounting the details of her marriage and attempted murder while Thomas glared at her from across the room. But Adrian was there, seated in the front row, his gaze never leaving her face, and she drew strength from his presence. Lord Hartwell testified about his daughter. Sarah Pemberton's sister testified about her disappearance. Servants testified about Thomas's rages, his cruelty, the unexplained absences of his wives. The evidence was overwhelming. Thomas's defense fell apart within days.
His solicitors argued that the women's deaths were accidental, that Alara was a scorned woman seeking revenge, that the Duke had fabricated evidence out of grief for his own sister. But the jury saw through it. They saw the pattern, the meticulous planning, the complete lack of remorse. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on 3 counts of murder. The sentence was death by hanging. Ilara was in the courtroom when the sentence was read. She watched Thomas's face crumple, watched him plead for mercy, for leniency, for anything. And she felt nothing. No satisfaction, no triumph, only a vast, echoing relief. It was over. Truly, finally over. Outside the courthouse, Adrian wrapped his arms around her, holding her as she shook, not with tears, but with the simple release of tension she had carried for so long. "Breathe," he murmured against her hair. "Just breathe." She did, and with each breath, the world felt a little lighter. They were married 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at Adrian's estate chapel. There were no crowds, no grand spectacle, just a handful of close friends, including Mrs. Dawson, who wept openly, and the priest who had known Adrian since childhood. Ilara wore a simple white gown, and Adrian wore his finest suit. And when they spoke their vows, she saw tears in his eyes. "I never thought I would have this," he admitted later, as they danced alone in the ballroom, the musicians having been dismissed for the night. "A wife, a partner, someone to share my life with." "Neither did I," Ilara said. "After Thomas, I thought I would never trust anyone again, never love again. And now," she looked up at him, at the man who had saved her life, and then, somehow, managed to save her heart too. "Now I cannot imagine being anywhere else." Adrian smiled, a real smile, full and unguarded, and spun her across the floor. They danced until the candles burned low, until the moon rose high over the estate, until there was nothing in the world but the two of them, and the music, and the impossible, miraculous fact that they had survived. 5 years later, Ilara stood in the same garden where she had once confronted Thomas Ashford, watching her daughter toddle across the grass. Isabel, named for Adrian's sister, was 3 years old, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, and she was fearless in the way only children can be. "Careful, Izzy," Ilara called as the little girl reached for a flower. Adrian appeared beside her, slipping an arm around her waist. "She is fine. She has your stubbornness and your determination. A dangerous combination." Ilara laughed, leaning into him. 5 years of marriage had not dimmed the love between them. If anything, it had deepened, grown roots that tangled through every part of their lives. They had their struggles, their moments of conflict and doubt, but they faced them together, and that made all the difference. "I received a letter today," Adrian said, "from Lady Catherine Bellamy." "Oh?" Ilara looked up at him. Lady Catherine had been Thomas's intended victim, the woman he had been courting when Ilara returned from the dead. They had saved her life, though she had taken months to recover from the shock of learning how close she had come to being his 4th victim. She is engaged. To a doctor, apparently, a good man. "I am glad," Ilara said sincerely. "She deserves happiness." "As do you." Adrian pressed a kiss to her temple. "Are you happy, Ilara? Truly?" She thought about it, about the life they had built together, filled with quiet mornings and laughter-filled evenings, with the work they did together to help other women in vulnerable situations, with the simple joy of watching their daughter grow. About the scars she still carried, the missing toes, the nightmares that occasionally woke her in the dead of night, and how Adrian was always there, steady and strong, to remind her she was safe. "Yes," she said, "I am happy. Are you?" Adrian looked at her, at their daughter,
at the estate that had been a cold, empty mausoleum when she first arrived and was now a home. More than I ever thought possible. Isabel ran up to them then, her hands full of wildflowers, her face flushed with excitement. "Mama, Papa, look!" They knelt together, admiring her collection, and Alara felt Adrian's hand find hers, their fingers intertwining. She thought of the girl she had been, broken, discarded, left to die in the snow. And she thought of the woman she had become, strong, loved, unbreakable. It had been a long journey. There had been pain, fear, moments when she thought she would not survive. But she had. And on the other side of that darkness, she had found light. She had found Adrian. She had found herself. And that, Alara thought, as she watched her daughter dance through the garden, was worth every step.